When you're in love, you know it. And it's the same with product market fit. It's like, if you're kind of thinking, maybe, is this product market fit? That's not product market fit. When you have product market fit, it's just like this blindingly obvious thing. I think he was talking to his mom, and he was talking about, all the money that investors had put into it and then ultimately lost. And she was like, and do you have to pay that back? And he's like, well, no. And actually, they want to give me more to try again. You're, a little performing monkey designing some sort of algorithm that they specify.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle, @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
Okay, so I guess the question then is what's your favorite thing about hiring?
Hiring? I think
specifically about interviews.
Well, okay, so I think of interviews as a necessary evil. I think that what I like about hiring is that it's pretty cool to build a team. Mm-hmm. I think the most important realization I've had is no one person can do everything. Mm-hmm. And there's something really gratifying about building a team that's bigger than you that can produce far more than you ever could alone.
Right.
So I think hiring and building a team is a core competency, I think, of a startup founder.
So the context for this question was when we spoke to Mariana in the last episode, she talked about how interviews are often so bad that you don't really know what you're getting and you miss great people because like you're measuring for something kind of arbitrary.
Well, and also, so they're flawed in so many different ways. Like people get nervous.
Mm-hmm. So this is a big one that we deal with at Circle. It's like how do we know that this person doesn't know how to do the thing we asked them to do versus just got nervous in an interview?
Yeah, it's like, I didn't used to like people watching while I did Excel spreadsheets. I do a lot of spreadsheets to do projections, and some people are perfectly comfortable with somebody standing over their shoulder.
Is it the fact that you didn't like people knowing that you could use Excel?
No, it's just something about having to do something on demand under scrutiny
right.
is a little bit paralyzing.
Well, so I think there's this bias almost towards people who enjoy that. I view it almost like playing board games.
Yeah.
Right? You're solving a puzzle with another human. It's kind of a game. It's something that you optimize. It's maybe something that you practice. And of course, playing this particular kind of board game on a whiteboard with an nerdy interviewer or stranger is not anything at all like building software. Yeah,
I think you can tend to freeze up. I think you can optimize for people that know arcane knowledge. Mm-hmm. I think you totally suppress the ability to know who's good at building a team.
Or know who's building a team.
Who's a good building block of a team.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
Who's going to be able to take constructive criticism, who's going to be able to provide constructive criticism.
Right. In college, we did a module, which I've heard almost no one kind of talk about since, but just sort of the elements of a team. And the ones that really stick in my mind are kind of the starter and the finisher. The people who can start projects and the people who can drive it over the line. But there was another one, which was the person who made the team like work well together.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you measure their output by number of lines or number of bug fixed or any sort of quantifiable measure, maybe you can't even tell that maybe they look like the worst person in a team, but actually they're the gel that makes the whole team work.
Well, and this kind of goes back to the whole holacracy thing. Mm-hmm. We don't need managers. They're dead weight. Right. Well, no, in fact, you do.
Yeah, I have a whole thing about managers.
A whole thing about holacracy?
The whole thing about managers.
No, about holacracy.
There's this idea that you want to actually test whether someone's going to be good at their job. And no one basically knows how to do that.
Even like basic things. So when I started using Quip, I would be writing something the way I always wrote it, and then my co-founder would start making suggestions, and I found it excruciatingly painful. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is my first draft. Please don't look at it. And he said, well, it's on Quip. It's ready to be looked at. And after that, I started writing everything in a text file. And then when it was ready, I put it into Quip.
I think that there's so many people who have different workflows. And one of the things we found at Circle is that the amount of people who had different ways of running the application locally, like everyone had their own way. Some people were running it in VMware, some people in Docker, some people had like set up, all sorts of weird things. And so like, if you catch someone outside of their workflow, it's like, are you really getting a true representation of themselves?
Yeah.
Of their ability to deliver code? Actually, let me take that back, because it's not the ability to deliver code that's important, right? It's the ability to, as a team, deliver the business objectives. And so, like, if you're measuring someone can you write a quicksort or a binary tree or something like that on a whiteboard, it's 17 steps removed from.
Can you take a product specification and digest it? Mm-hmm. Can you coordinate with other people who are on systems that you're going to have to integrate with? Are you going to take constructive feedback in a code review? Mm-hmm. Are you going to weigh right what's important in terms of scalability, security, and
Have
quality?
you used feature flags before?
Well, that's a new one, but thanks for wearing your T-shirt and talking about it. And all these are not things that you'll get out of an interview. These are behavioral things about producing software.
So a bunch of people have started, and I guess this has been going for a couple of years, but you see Heroku, for example, talked about this, of bringing engineers on site to try and build something during their time. And I think it's kind of a closer approximation than a whiteboard interview, but it's still... you're not working with people. You're almost necessarily separated from the team because we want to see what your individual contribution is. Yeah.
So when I was at TripIt, they did something I liked very much, which was they gave us a homework assignment. Mm-hmm. And they said purposely, don't spend too long on it. Spend about 2 to 3 hours on this, and then you're going to come in and present it. So I was interviewing for a product job.
But even that is nothing like a work with a team to deliver a business objective.
Well, a lot of what a product manager's job is to write initial specifications and then present to a bigger team.
Okay.
So it was actually a really good way.
Okay, I see that, yeah.
So I vividly remember what mine was, because it was the nucleus of, so they just said, here's your problem. And I said, okay, to solve this problem, I need to come up with personas for business travel. Mm-hmm. So I came up with personas, and then I presented and I said, here's how these personas would tackle this problem. Mm-hmm. And it was the nucleus for what I actually did once I joined.
Okay, nice. So
the people we interviewed after that I did not like were the people who just said, so the issue was basically integrating Yelp reviews into TripIt. Mm-hmm. And they just got down to this very low level very quickly.
Right. So they'd already made their decision. They hadn't really looked at the goals of the...
Yeah, so they just said, okay, we'll stick this in here, we'll do this. And it was like, well, for me, it was more important that you fit a product feature into how it's going to be used by a person.
Right. So I'm looking at interviews where I was on the receiving end of the interview. And so there was one at Dropbox. And I didn't get this job. So you're put in a room for 4 hours, and every hour a new set of 2 people come in, and they're sitting at the other end of a table from you. And then you're, a little performing monkey designing some sort of algorithm that they specify. And I remember getting into a discussion with one of the interviewers. Discussion is a synonym for an argument. Where basically... I had made some assumptions and he didn't like my assumptions, and we were just kind of talking at cross purposes, and it got into a bit of an argument, and I didn't get hired.
Yeah, so when I was interviewing at TripIt, I remember I was interviewing with the founder and VP of engineering, Andy Denmark.
Okay.
And it was the 2 of us in a room. He said something pretty abrasive and sharp.
Okay.
And I was just like, whoa. I was like, okay. And I kind of took a breath. And was like, either I can yell at him back, or I could just
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. Andy, it's interesting you say that. And he's like, I just wanted to see how you would react.
I think that, and
if I fucked with you.
That's kind of a real dick move. It's the idea that someone would fuck with you to see how you react is like... It's an awful thing to do to someone, while at the same time it's kind of like, this is what our culture is, and you kind of got to be able to deal with our culture. I'm not really sure whether it's a good or bad thing.
It's funny because TripIt was an exceedingly polite culture, but it was very direct.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So nobody ever raised their voices. Nobody ever shouted. I don't think I heard a swear word except for occasionally. But people were very direct with feedback. Like, that's not working. Okay.
The other interview that I did that was interesting, and your presentation reminded me of it. This was at Lookout. And at Lookout, what they have you do after you do the interviews, they have you come in and present to the entire company, although the company might be too big at this stage. But at the time, it was like 70 people, and about 35% or 35 of them would show up, people from all sorts of functions, not just engineers. And so I was presenting on alias analysis and how it was useful for security. And half the people in the audience are sort of marketing or sales or something that isn't an engineering function. And I'm presenting about this really hardcore esoteric thing. And it's like, I don't see the value in this at all. And later, I attended one of these and I saw the value in that someone completely bombed. It was just terrible. And I feel like they could probably have achieved that in a different way without wasting an hour of 35 people's time, plus expecting the candidate to do that.
Was it that they wanted to show that you're comfortable presenting your work?
No idea. I mean, that wasn't a part of the job.
It's funny because so I got an engineering degree, and part of our projects was to present our work. Like, so we had a clinic project, and you worked on it for a semester or the whole year, and then you would go to the auditorium and stand in front of engineering professors who'd been in their jobs for 20 to 50 years and were the most brittle curmudgeons you could think of.
Yeah.
So they knew far more than you ever could as an undergraduate and were eager to tell you. But that was excellent training for the real world.
I mean, maybe, but if you go to a company that has, I mean, if you look at all the different ways that you could present your work to a thing, so you could go up and give a PowerPoint presentation, you could be doing some sort of code review, you could be doing, you're sitting in a meeting with people like the Jeff Bezos style of, there's 15 minutes of reading at the start of a meeting and we don't talk. Like, there's all sorts of things that ways that you could present. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily a good idea to interview on one of them.
Yeah, I guess I was going on a different tangent that I think being able to present your ideas is actually a very valuable skill, even if you're technical.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is a sort of a key thing in all elements of life. I'm not going to disagree there.
Yeah, I mean, so I give a lot of talks about feature flagging, and I've found interesting, like, some of the people who ask the toughest questions or seem like the harshest critics, I've found later are actually people who are interested in becoming a customer.
I see. Okay, so they're thinking, this sounds cool, but there's no way it can possibly work.
Or, I don't think you can have this area figured out.
Right. And then you give them the answer, and they're like, oh, they clearly know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like people who are like, well, how do you handle this? And I think they're being a little pushy. It's because they care. This is something that's bothered them in real life. Yeah. And so they're asking questions because they're engaged.
Right.
It's the people who don't ask any questions who don't care.
Well, there's also the kind of people who ask questions to show off what they know.
Oh, yeah.
And at conferences, these are the worst people.
Well, those were our engineering professors.
Right.
Like, of course, you've been in the field for 30 years.
Yeah.
You know more than me as an undergrad.
There's a certain amount of just like what kind of person it is who's asking them. There's this very, very famous CS professor who invented a whole branch of compiler stuff, who I'm not going to mention because he's a bit of an asshole. And we were at this conference, and he consistently asked really, really nasty questions. And there was one guy, he asked the question, and the guy kind of froze, and he was like, oh, I don't know, that maybe there was a language barrier as well. And the guy eventually goes, it's okay, you don't need to answer, I knew the answer anyway.
Oh, so that reminds me, I think there are people who think that if they make other people look bad, they look good.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was talking to, I'm not going to name the company, but it's a gaming company, and I'd worked with the founder before at another job. Mm-hmm. And he's notorious for screaming fits at his employees. Just, you all suck. Mm-hmm. You all fucked up. This is awful. Why do I have such idiots? And my take on that, now that I'm further along in my career, is that you are the CEO and founder. Mm-hmm. If you are screaming at everybody that works for you for being incompetent fuck-ups, you know who's the incompetent fuck-up?
It's clearly the founder.
Yeah. You have, number one, not hired good people.
Yeah.
And number two, not trained and mentored them to be better people.
And also, you yourself appear to have some deep psychological issues that maybe you should be talking to someone about.
Yeah. I mean, if truly everybody around you is incompetent...
Right. And you hired them all.
And you have not either mentored them to be better or...
So what you're saying is that he was bad at interviewing?
It's funny because he actually he interviewed me. Mm-hmm. I didn't get the job. I worked for a related company to his, and once we worked together for about 6 months, he tried very hard to hire me.
Oh, right. Interesting.
He's like, well, wow, Edith is actually really good. I really want her to work for me. And I was like, no.
So, clearly then that they had an interview process that was failing, right? Because they couldn't identify or whatever. And my sense is that absolutely nobody in the Valley, possibly in the whole world, knows how to do interviewing at all. I mean, perhaps it's not even possible.
I was about to say, I'm sure some people are, but we were talking before about how Google...
Mm-hmm. Right, so Google, 50% I think is the number that they estimate. People who they hire who were successful within their roles.
And they did another study actually where they studied the most successful teams, and the most successful teams were not the ones with the highest, smarts or scores. It was the one where they worked together best as a team.
Right. The people that I continue to be very impressed by are the people who don't necessarily have, a CS pedigree and don't come across as like all-knowing and often don't know that much like algorithms or kind of impressive stuff, but are just able to like get stuff done. And it's usually through their own like personal focus. They're able to like sit at a desk and produce code, business output, whatever it is, for like 8 hours. And that beats the pants off someone who's got all this like pedigree or who knows like operating systems in and out, but gets constantly distracted by IRC or Hacker News or a shiny thing over there.
And also I think somebody who can keep coming back to this, who can work with other people, whether they be, and Mariana just talked about this, whether they be people in their own community, in other teams or partners.
Right. It kind of comes back to how teams are structured, and I wonder if you can even hire without knowing what team that person is going to be on, or what role they're gonna function in the team.
You mean more of a Google style of let's hire 1,000 people and let God sort them out?
Yeah, so I mean, I certainly think you could hire 1,000 people and it's like, okay, this person is going to be very good at gelling a team together. Let us find a team where that works.
Where team needs gelling.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if that's what Google does. The impression I get is no. But like, people are clearly not replaceable cogs in the way that people would like them to be. And if you're going to interview people as if they're replaceable cogs, or as if everyone that you interview is the same as the next person, you can't possibly be successful. The thing that we talked about at the start of the episode, where someone gets nervous, it's like, are we going to say that all people who get nervous in interviews are bad at their jobs? That couldn't possibly be true.
Oh gosh, so I flashed back. So I interviewed at TripIt, and I also interviewed with Greg Brockway, the founder, who has a very interesting speaking style it's very direct. Okay. And he asked me a question, and I absolutely froze. And it was the silliest question for me to freeze on. He asked me if I read. Okay. And I read a lot. Okay. Like and you froze because like there's just too many directions to answer. Yeah, and he's like, "What do you like to read?" I'm like, I mean, you've seen all my books. I mean, I read a lot. That's an amazing collection of books. And I finally stumbled out on books. He's like, and he said, "What kind of books?" I'm like, "All of them." And I walked out and I said, "I didn't get that job." But you got it. I got the job. Okay, right. But it's just sometimes people just freeze. Yeah. One of the things you see where this comes up a lot is in sort of marginalized communities or people who are not well represented in the tech industry. So people like pattern match basically, and so they see it's another white male engineer. It's like, great, right? He'll fit really well in our StarCraft league, and someone who doesn't fit in that doesn't do so well. And I think if you're the kind of nervous engineer, then you're not one of the confident people who are confident in their interviews, and therefore you don't pattern match. Yeah, it's funny. So James Smith gave me some really good advice. He's about, I'd say, a year to 2 years ahead of Launch Darkly. So I was trying to hire our first marketing person, and it was funny because I kept interviewing people. I would look them up on LinkedIn, and he was connected, and he'd say, "Oh, I interviewed them a year ago." Yeah. He gave me very good advice, which was, marketing people are very good at marketing themselves. I see. By definition. I mean, are they? Well, he said, watch out. Oh, okay, right. So, they're good at marketing. Can I challenge that briefly? Yeah. So, marketing is, there's brand marketing, right? And there's sort of what was traditionally marketing like 10 or 15 years ago. And now a lot of marketing is digital marketing. It's analytics, and it's funnels, and it's numbers, and it's correlations, and all that sort of thing, and optimizing all these things. All the things. And it's really not branding anymore. At least it's not the same function that I think most SaaS companies are looking for in marketers. And so like, if they're really good at marketing themselves, perhaps that's a sign that they're the brand marketers that you're not looking for. Whereas, maybe the person that you're looking for is someone who comes in and can't look you in the eye but gives you a spreadsheet. That's very meta of you. I think you do need both. I mean, you do need somebody who can write good copy. You do need somebody who can, craft a message.
Sure,
but you do need
right.
to pair that with analytics.
Yeah. I'm just saying, maybe good marketers are not necessarily good at branding today for SaaS companies.
I think you have to be careful if somebody is too good at branding.
Because they're going to convince you that they're...
Or they might be too concerned about their personal brand rather than the company.
Right. So this is something that's kind of creeping its way into engineering, and it has been for the last maybe decade or so. The people who build projects, open source projects especially, and who are able to create a lot of traction for their open source projects, and then who come to your company and are a lot more interested with their own personal brand and promoting themselves rather than like working on the hard problems that your company needs.
Yeah, I got a long discussion with a friend of mine about this. There are some rock star developers. And as you put it, maybe they're very good at building this open source project, but they're not very good at working on a team.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the definition of a rock star, right? That they're the person that the spotlight is on. And maybe you actually need like the bassist.
Yeah, I in fact despise the phrase rock star.
Okay.
I think we talked about this.
I feel like we did. Did we have an episode where we talked about like 10x developers or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just recap briefly.
Yeah, sure.
Like as you said, I think a successful team is more like a chorus or an orchestra. You have your tubist, your trombonist, your viola, your person who's doing the cymbals.
Yeah.
You have a little triangle in the corner.
Yeah.
And they're all specialists in their little part, but they're all playing together, and they're making a sound that is so much bigger than any of these individual parts.
Yep.
That's a successful team. And if they're all like playing at different times and not paying attention to where everybody else is playing, you have noise. You have a cacophony.
I had an interesting experience. I went to see Joshua Bell, who's a famous violinist, play a couple of weeks ago. And ignoring when Joshua Bell was on stage, which wasn't all of it, but there was a conductor, and the conductor was very, very full of himself. And like he was waving his arms around in a way that sort of indicated that he was not so much communicating with the thing as like, performing himself. Showboating, very good word. And I think that this is one of the reasons that engineers can often hate working with PMs or with managers, because you get someone who isn't really contributing, but who's like waving their arms around frenetically.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it's always the case, because a good conductor, no doubt, is exceptionally valuable for making a team, for gelling a team, bringing it together, making the sound work just right. But then if you get a bad one and they're getting all the credit for the team, for all the team's effort, then it's not a fun experience to be on that team.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to, like I said, the bad manager is the one who yells at his team and tells his or her team and tells them all are idiots. It's like I worked with a guy who was notorious for everything is all broken. Everybody who works for me is a ninny. Only I can save the day. And he did this 3 times, so I was like, okay,
that's a tough one.
The issue is not that everybody on your team is a ninny. It's that you let things fall apart.
So this is something that...
The firefighter versus the quiet person who just gets shit done.
Right. This is something that I struggled with, because I, certainly in the early days of Circle, I really didn't have any idea how to sort of put out a product vision. And there was all this code that was being delivered where I'd stop it at the last minute and I'd be like, oh no, this is all wrong.
Oh, the seagull style.
And it was...
It is corrosive.
It really was. It was very, very toxic.
It's
and it created all sorts of problems within the team that it took years to fix that sort of thing.
So I had that happen to me too from the other end, but why do you think it was toxic?
Well, just like, people put all this effort in, and then it's like literally just before you're about to ship that you're told no, like it's all wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've seen James Lindenbaum's...
You're doing it wrong?
Yeah, so James as a service is a thing that Heroku people built for...
It's hilarious.
Yeah. So it's like jamesaservice.herokuapp.com or something. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was the same kind of thing. It's like, no, this is wrong for reasons I'm not quite able to articulate, and I certainly should have articulated before you started writing code in it.
Yeah, I mean, so this happened to me early in my career from the other end. I was working on a project, and back then we had UATs, user accepting testing, which is basically it's all done. So I was in engineering at the time. The thing is all done, it's built, it's past QA, we're about to ship it, and we show it to our VP of product. Actually, no, he was the co-founder at the time. And it's mainly for us to walk through it so that he can do his own demos. That was what we thought the purpose was.
Right. And his purpose?
He looked at it, he's like, this is not what I want at all.
Not what I want.
At all.
Wow.
At all. And I looked at the product manager I'd worked with and I said, this is just what the product manager had.
Yeah.
Like, I did a lot of meetings with the product manager.
Yeah.
And he's like, product manager's wrong.
And so was the product manager wrong?
I don't know. So I was an engineer and he looked at the product manager and said, the product manager who worked for him is an idiot. This isn't what you should have built. And he grabbed the mouse and he went to a competitor's site. He's like, this is what you should have built. And I said, well, we built this.
Yeah.
This was just supposed to be, the UAT where you accept it. He's like, this UAT has failed.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think a lot of my career has been in revulsion to that moment.
Right. Okay.
That's why I became a product manager, because I didn't want to have projects like that anymore. I was like, well, if I'll be a better product manager. But really, it was just the whole idea of getting feedback as soon as possible from everybody, internal and external.
Yeah. I often give people advice on, you've just raised a seed round or maybe you're trying to get from product market fit to the bit just after product market fit. And often we talk about company culture and what is the structure of your company going to be like. And the thing that I try to convey most of all is how important it is to set your culture and your mission and your product vision and your values. Because if you don't have those, then everyone is going to be going in their own direction. I mean, they're going to be going in their own direction anyway. But the more closely you can make sure that everyone on your team knows what it is you're building, why it is you're building it, who you are as a people together, the less you're going to have exactly what you talked about, where you get to the final hurdle and someone says this UAT has failed.
Yeah, and I didn't see it as a hurdle. I thought we were just, I thought it was our opportunity to get the pat on the back and thanks for your work done. And all the engineers, I were looking at each other shell-shocked.
And it was all their first time getting that feedback or in front of one of these things?
I think so, yeah.
Right. So presumably you quit on the spot. You're like, this company is clearly dysfunctional and...
Oh, I was a kid.
I know.
Yeah. No, we went back, we rebuilt it, from scratch.
Right.
But it was such a waste of effort.
So in the end, was he right?
I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know. I don't know whether what we'd done would have been fine or not.
Yeah. I mean, clearly he was wrong in the sense that he should have created a process within his company where you get that at the start.
Yeah, he should have not... He should have not said my product manager is a ninny.
Yeah.
And why did you listen to what he was saying?
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you hired him.
I get mocked a lot in Circle for referring to things as shit. And I try not to do it about our own stuff, but often you look at something that maybe was built a couple of years ago and that seemed like a good idea at the time. You're just like, how is this still in the product?
Well, if you're not completely embarrassed by it.
Yeah, exactly.
You waited too long to ship.
I know in theory that shipping some things that were shit is a necessary element, if only from an experimentation point of view.
If only to discover that something you thought was important nobody cares about.
Right. Yes. Exactly. And sometimes they're still there because sometimes it's more important to build the thing that someone is saying, or this thing is no one uses it, so it's kind of a very low priority to get rid of it or something.
Yeah, it goes back to Dave McClure's saying kill a feature.
Right. So then there's lots of things that are shit, and I got mocked. I think from a lot of my employees because I would refer to things as shit. It's this is shit, we need to fix it. This is shit, we need to fix it. And I tried very hard to make it so that it wasn't, the thing that you have built is shit, or you as a person are shit. But people are still tied into the things that they built and the ideas that they had and that sort of thing. So it can be very hard to, and especially if you're a former engineer as a sort of a first-time manager or first-time company founder, to figure out careful ways of expressing that you want to make the product better for reasons, or comparing it to where the product currently is.
Well, and it's also,
to put it delicately,
it's also a matter of prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything can't be absolutely perfect.
No, of course not. And if it is, you've probably failed.
Yeah. So it's trade-offs. It's okay, this is not as strong as we want it to be, but we were focusing on this other thing.
Yeah.
Which also, to tie it back to the original, it's very hard to interview for that.
Right, exactly. What you were saying about the TripIt managers was, testing you for how you handled direct feedback. And it's the more I think about it, the more useful that is as a, I mean, it's
so you've swung around in the course of...
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's a culture of direct feedback, then it doesn't do anyone any good to hire someone who doesn't work well with direct feedback.
Yeah, I just was like, whoa, that's a little bit harsh, but okay.
Right.
Take a breath.
But at the
What
same
you-
time, it looks almost abusive to do to an interviewee.
I guess I've been in far very, very tough engineering cultures, and I thought this was minor compared to what I'd heard before.
Right.
I mean, I think the opposite is also very painful if your stuff is terrible, but nobody tells you.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. That is the worst. There's this idea of millennials are coming up and into the workforce and that sort of thing, and
I heard everything before when it was Gen X. Like everybody complains about the new generation.
Right. And the specific things that people complain about millennials are things like safe spaces and they've no way of taking feedback and that kind of thing. They want everything to be delightful and shiny and I don't know, for some reason the word My Little Pony popped into my head.
Are you a brownie?
No.
There's nothing wrong with that.
But still, I am not a Bernie.
This is a safe space, Paul.
So
you can let your mane down.
So you
go graze in the pasture.
So you've got people who believe very strongly and with very good reason that everything should be nice and people should be nice to each other and then there's work cultures that are emphatically not that. Not every work culture, but every work culture is different and they're not necessarily they're places where people say things directly. They're places where people have different beliefs than other people in the organization. You kind of need to interview for that in a certain sense. Is this person going to be successful within this company? And I see a lot of criticism of interviewing and interviews where they're not, let's say, as open to the person who is interviewing as they could be. When we hired very early on, we had a focus on work-life separation. So it just sort of happened that a lot of the first engineers that we hired had families, very often had young kids. And so it was important to people to have that work-life separation. But when you're an early stage startup, there are often times that you need to do something outside of the regular 9 to 5 or outside someone's regular 9 to 5 hours. But the fact that we had created this work-life separation thing made it very difficult for me to feel that it was okay to call people late in an emergency.
So what we've done is we've been very flexible about hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have engineers who work half days.
Yeah.
But in return, it's like, okay, you might get to work a half day every week on a Wednesday, but in return,
we're going to call you at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And
we were explicit about that trade-off.
Right.
It's like you have a family.
So with each one of these things, each one of these requirements, you get an increasingly small intersection in the Venn diagram sense of people who can manage to do this. And if you hire someone who has major objections to being called at 3 a.m. or who doesn't like to go for lunch or doesn't like StarCraft, whatever it is, you can get to like real problems, and that's not even including the legally protected things.
Well, I think in a small company you have to be really ruthless about this person has a huge impact on your culture.
Right. The issue is not so much whether or not you can find them. The issue is when you interview for these people, there's now 6 facets of things that you need to interview for. And then the interview is a whiteboard coding challenge.
I think, though, a startup is creating value out of nothing. It's not like a big company where you can hire somebody for 2 years and see if it works out. Mm-hmm. If somebody doesn't make a difference in 2 months at a startup, it's a lifetime.
But very often you have to hire them without that knowledge.
Yeah,
maybe you wait 2 months and it's hire fast, fire fast sort of thing.
Yeah, you talked about this in one of your famous posts.
Oh, which one is this?
The guy who wouldn't work on Sundays.
Oh God, yeah. That was employee 1.
So, in hindsight, what would you have done differently with that?
We failed to set expectations.
So that's what a lot of my questions about support, blogging, they were setting expectations.
I guess we failed to know what the expectations were ourselves and to even agree amongst me and the other co-founder as to what the expectations were. Like, I didn't know that I would have this adverse reaction to someone, it being Sunday, they wanted to work on their own stuff. I was like, oh. I didn't realize until it happened that was a thing.
Yeah. Early startups are hard.
Yeah. Startups are really,
We're 2 years in, and sometimes I look back and I'm like, whoa. We talked about this with Martine the other day.
You kind of wonder how anyone gets startups going at all.
They're still really fun. Like I get up every day excited.
I mean, startups have lots and lots of excitement, but like
Not excitement like
a lot
woohoo,
of
but
like
just
awfulness.
Excitement. It's fun now that we have customers using us. It's fun
Yeah.
that our customers so we just hit 100 billion flags. That's a lot
100 billion flags.
a month.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's a
really
lot of flags.
I mean, I'm an engineer. To think that we created this from nothing is
Right.
It's pretty super cool.
I can't even think how much that represents. Our major measure was like how many machines were in use. Like we had the graph of how many machines were in use, and
Amazon had that graph too, and it had a little dollar sign next to it.
I mean, one day we're on like 10 machines. We're like, holy shit, like there's 10 machines in production, and then a couple of years later there's 1,000 machines, or I don't even know how many are in production now. And it's like, wow, like that's our little rinky dinky 10 machines is now like we don't even notice.
Yeah, I don't celebrate our machines because I pay the Amazon bill every month, and I'm like,
I mean, we paid the Amazon bill as well, and that was terrifying in its own way.
So I think you brought up an interesting point, though. I think sometimes interviews fail because people don't know what they're interviewing for, which sounds...
I would say as an industry, no one has any idea what they're interviewing for. So actually, let me talk about a really good interview I went to. This was to be an intern at Barclays Capital.
Yep.
It was a 2-day interview. They flew over 100 of us in at the same time to do these things. And they sat us in groups and they told us to solve a problem. And it was like, I think they're like, okay, we're going to stand 10 of you in a row and you have to like sort yourselves into ascending order. And so we sat around a table and we discussed like how we would communicate bubble sort to each other. And, it was mostly about communication. There was a small bit of like technical stuff. And, there were sort of like natural leaders and natural followers who sort of established themselves in the thing, and they needed both. And they were, they knew what they were hiring for. And it very much wasn't, technical skill.
It was teamwork.
Right. It was teamwork. And there was, Barclays, there was no technical skill required at all. Like there were some people who built, impressive distributed systems and that sort of thing. But like what I did in my internship was I added a field to a database. Like it was terrible. And like as a result, the teamwork was the thing that really mattered.
Yeah, it reminds me of I forget. I'm not going to name the name of the software company, but it was a big software company that at the time
It starts with a G.
At the time, there was this thing for a while that you don't need product managers.
Oh yeah.
That they get in the way of engineers.
I mean, they're not wrong. That's kind of the point, right?
So they didn't hire product managers.
Oh, okay.
But then they realized that the people who were always in demand on their teams were the engineers who were product managerial.
Right. I had the belief when we started Circle that like good engineers were good product managers. And it's like I had a good sense of product vision. And I considered it as an important part of a product that I was building. And so I kind of thought that was what it was to be an engineer. And as a result, we hired a bunch of people by whiteboard challenges and other engineering things. And then I was shocked that like...
Shocked?
Yeah, I actually was shocked that they didn't know how to like, build product. And I was like, oh, maybe that's just me. Maybe it's not a thing that a whiteboard challenge tests for.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I'm very ordinary, but then I'm surprised that I have skills that other people don't have.
I mean, you must, right? Like everyone has skills that other people have, that other people don't have.
Yeah, I mean, I took it for granted. So I was talking to a friend whose company just failed. You probably know who it is, but it was an engineer and a product person, and they built a product. And what he said, I didn't realize that you really had to go out and market it and sell it.
Right.
Which sounds horrendously naive.
Yeah.
But he was very earnest about it. And it's like, no, I've been managing revenue as part of my product job for the past 8 years. Like I was responsible for growing revenue. It was a line item I cared about. I was very ruthless about that. A lot of product people just do not have that as part of their responsibilities. Well,
this is why it can be so valuable to work as an engineer at a 20-person company.
I was picturing a rocket.
Yeah, 26. Yeah.
And I was picturing Elon Musk.
You're going to be in the bit that's discarded at the start. No, at like an early stage company that crosses milestones in particular, and that crosses milestones from like, the 10 to the 20 to the 50 to the 100, or, any one of those. Like you will learn a lot in terms of what's failing and what you need to hire to deal with those failing, and then like seeing the before and the after and knowing where the value is.
Yeah, I mean, so we started this off about talking about jobs you didn't get. I very much wanted a job that I didn't get. Didn't get it. And
Where?
It was at Flickster.
Okay.
I very much wanted to work at Flickster. I would have been their first product manager. Got deep in the interviews, and I'd come out of enterprise software, and they looked at me and they said very nicely, "You seem very competent, but we want somebody who's been there, done that with consumer software."
Right.
And I was like, that's fair.
Yeah.
Didn't get that job. I worked instead at military.com, which was great because she gave me, my boss said, we're making X amount of millions of revenue, make it X plus 25% in a year. I said, well, what do I do to do that? She said, figure it out.
Nice.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was the thing that you needed at that stage in your career. And
I figured it out. I got the revenue up.
Yeah.
And I went later and I talked to the guy who had gotten that job. And he said, yeah, you didn't want that job.
why was that?
You would have just been a product manager. You would have gotten revenue responsibility.
Right.
You wouldn't have become the person you are, basically.
Yeah. The amount of growth that people have at early stage startups versus much later stage startups, like you see kids who come out of college and they go to Google. And while I think there's a great amount of things to be learned at Google, like it's just incomparable to the amount that you learn as an early engineer at an early stage startup.
Well, I think there's good early stage startups and there's bad early stage startups.
Even if you work at the bad ones, I think that like you learn so much from them.
What do you think the lessons you learn are?
Well, I mean, you learn what doesn't work. It's like, yelling at people is a terrible management tactic.
It's not a management tactic.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It's more like an anti-tactic.
Right. And it's like, I think there's so much to learn from failure, and having failed a number of startups at this point, I think, a lot of what made Circle successful is what I learned from failing at the other ones.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of value in not even having failed, but to have gotten a rhythm of this is how, so Mariana talked about this before, of this is how we do things successfully.
Right, exactly. And part of that is this is what unsuccessful looks like.
Yeah.
So knowing, I get asked a lot, like how do you know when you have product market fit? My answer is generally like, it's kind of like being in love, right? You can think sometimes that you're in love, but when you're in love, you know it. And it's the same with product market fit. It's like you can kind of, if you're kind of thinking, maybe, is this product market fit? That's not product market fit. When you have product market fit, it's just like this blindingly obvious thing that like, it's taking off. You can't stop customers from using it. It feels nothing like the feeling of not having product market fit.
Well, not to be a curmudgeon, but that's hormones and it wears off.
Okay, maybe it wasn't the greatest analogy in the world.
Oh, we talked about this before where you think you have it, but you don't. You're just at a local maximum. Like Secret thought it had product market fit.
It had something. Like I think Secret is this really, really interesting case study, especially around the investment. Like people put like there was a big secondary. I think like 3 or 4 million was taken, 6 million was taken off the table in a secondary investment.
Yep.
And then when it failed, people were like, "Give back the money."
It's like no.
It's like no, of course not. That's why we took secondary.
Yeah, that's not in the bargain.
I think even when the VCs wrote a thing about like they should give the money back, and I was like, I don't know if I'd ever work with that VC as a result of him saying that.
I think that's a thing that we have in the States, which allows people to do startups. The idea of limited liability.
Right.
Like people are very hesitant to do startups, like for example, in Japan, because you're personally liable.
Yeah. Phil Greenspan, who made Ars Digita, had a very interesting blog post where I think he was talking to his mom, and he was talking about all the money that investors had put into it and then ultimately lost, and she was like, and do you have to pay that back? And he's like, well, no, not at all. And actually, they want to give me more to try again.
Yeah, I mean, so I remember my mom's quote when I started the company. I was afraid of telling her. Mm-hmm. My mom's worked her whole life basically, so she retired, I think, after 25 or 30 years at Lockheed Martin. Mm-hmm. So she'd been there when it was Martin Marietta. They got acquired by Lockheed. Same job. Actually went to scholarship in college on a Lockheed scholarship. So for me to tell her that I was going to go work at not just a risky startup, but my own risky startup, I didn't really want to tell her.
It's because she had a more risk-averse career than you had.
Yeah.
Right.
And same, my grandfather had worked his whole life at Bell. So I really dreaded telling her. Like, I didn't actually tell her until I had left my job. And I had started working in the startup, and they were coming to visit. I was like, oh, they're going to want to see my office. I should.
Yeah.
And
Here's my office. It's a closet in someone else's office.
so I wasn't even that. I mean, I was literally working out of my apartment.
Right.
John and I didn't even have an office. So I finally, all right, I need to just tell her. So I called her and I told her. And she said, well, Edith, I've seen many idiots start startups. You're smarter than most idiots. I think we've drifted away from interviewing, but I think you do have to kind of be an idiot to start a startup.
I mean, pitching is kind of interviewing in a certain way.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's very artificial.
Yeah. And then people are judging you on things that don't matter even in the slightest.
It's very artificial. It's very screening for things that might not matter.
Yeah. The pattern matching for, like, Paul Graham talked about this guy that they funded because he literally looked like Mark Zuckerberg. And then they realized immediately afterwards, like, that was a terrible thing. Like, what kind of idiots are we for doing that pattern matching? And then they controlled against it. But, like, even someone as smart and experienced as Paul Graham, like, makes that silly mistake.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is that VCs are going for really outsized returns.
Yeah.
So they're not going for 5% return.
I had coffee with Martin a couple of weeks ago, and he told me about this experiment. I don't remember where it was done, but it was like there was 3 animals of some kind, like ducks, let's say, and one of them was like fed on a schedule, and one of them was fed randomly, and one of them was fed when they pressed the button. And the duck that was fed on a schedule would start to arrive like a couple of minutes before the schedule for its feeding. The duck that pressed a button would press the button when it was hungry, and it just got in the habit of that. And then the other duck just went absolutely insane because it had no idea when the food was coming, and so like it would tap its foot 3 times and like touch its head and like quack or whatever to get the food. And this feels a lot like what VCs are doing. Right?
Yeah.
They have no idea what works, and so they look for some kind of. I mean, there possibly is no pattern that works, but they have to discern some sort of pattern amongst the tea leaves and figure it out. And so a lot of the times it's going to look fucking stupid.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's easy in hindsight to pick on like, why do you fund Yo?
Yeah.
Or why do you fund Secret? And I think in a VC's head, these are going to be the next Instagram or WhatsApp.
I mean, I did the numbers on Secret. And there was like that was absolutely fund, no questions asked. Like it.
Well, people thought it was going to be the next, like I said.
I mean, but if you just look at the expected value, if it had been the next thing, let's say, okay, companies that get to the stage that Secret are at, there's a 10% chance of it becoming the next Facebook. And if it does, then that means our investment right now is worth 10 billion. Yeah. And I have to put in 10 million to get that 10 billion. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a 10%, so you have to discount that 1,000-time return by 10 for the to get your expected value. But like it was a no-brainer for anyone who can do basic math. And obviously VCs are very good at basic math.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the dev tool space has struggled a little bit.
Not so much anymore.
Well, not so much anymore.
Yeah. I mean, once it was established, it was very easy to people were like, oh yeah, devs are the great things. But in 2011. People are like, yeah, developers don't pay for money. I have an email from Paul Graham saying developers don't pay for tools. Yeah,
and I think I still get that. Developer tools will never be big. I think people don't realize, as Mariana said, that tooling has become essential.
Right.
Like, you don't have a carpenter show up at a work site and say, hey, you need to build a hammer and a level before you can start working.
Well, I think people don't realize like how much space there is in tools. Like it's not just hammers, right? There's
nails.
There's people who are building companies that are we are the hammer that every company uses as a service.
Yeah, I think also it's funny. So I do due diligence now for other VCs, which is, and I always feel a little sheepish about it because I was vetting somebody's idea the other day, and I was like, oh, I don't think that's a big idea at all. I'm sure, and I heard this echo in my head of people saying that about our idea. Because when we came out, we were considered crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, this is ludicrous.
Yeah, so what was your reaction when you heard
I was like, I wrote a library to do this in like 10 lines. This is ludicrous. Who would pay for this?
Yeah, now you're a customer.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because it turns out that once you implement it 5 times in 5 different ways, you're like, oh, maybe there's an abstraction here, and maybe they've got it.
Yeah. So I think any idea when it starts out is either completely blinding obvious or seems so stupid.
Right.
And we were certainly in the so stupid camp. Everybody's like, what? Nobody, who needs that? Who would pay money for that?
Right. So Google acquired Apogee.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, oh, I forget what Apogee did, but like, I guess they must have failed. No. Google bought public company Apogee for $625 million.
Yep.
And I still don't know what Apogee does.
API management.
Yeah, I mean,
Clearly.
Right. I mean, clearly, I don't know why you need API management.
That's hilarious because I think people think of the dev tool space as this uniform thing.
Right.
And it's not. Like, so.
I mean, remember when Scott Rainey came on? He's like, there's these 4 different areas of dev tools. And there's the people who are actually making like editors, and then there's the people who are making SaaS tools like Circle, and then there's the people who are making products that appeal to developers like Stripe, and like those are completely different categories.
Yeah, or even like I think there's stuff that's within the stack, like within a data center that's just I have no clue about.
Right, because I've never had a data center.
Yeah. Like sometimes, I'm like, so my VC friend put it the best. He's like, yeah, there's people who invest deep in the stack. I'm not one of them. Right.
Because presumably they don't know it.
They don't know
invest in what you don't know.
It's very funny. He was actually the guy who was at Salesforce and who acquired Heroku.
Okay.
So he was corporate development.
Right.
So it was interesting. I was like, oh, we're in the house that Heroku built.
This is
Billy.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
So it's very much like interviewing, right? So you're talking to this person and you're trying to discern some like pixie dust about what makes them special in some way.
And I think if you're a good company, you're also interviewing the VC. Like, is this a VC I want to work with?
Yeah.
Like, I've gotten very strong warnings about a couple firms. Just do not work with them.
Yeah, I could give a couple of warnings and have gotten warnings myself about those.
Yeah, it's like good advice I got was...
Do you want to name some there?
We're all friends of the Valley.
Long career, small place.
Best advice I got was... it was from my friend Mike Beebe, who had actually gone through YC. Mm-hmm. He said, trust that you'll find an investor, but what you're really trying to do is find the right fit. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to be with this person for a long time.
Yep.
Like a long time.
For people who want to be company founders, like there's a lot of lore around, or a lot of excitement, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Shininess. Around becoming a company founder these days.
Oh, it's like I said, it's like being a screenwriter in LA.
Right. Yeah, and there's just so many of these things that you have to do, and like you're signing up for them, and if you're not signing up for them, don't found a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think people get confused with the successful startup that has raised a B, C, or D, where you go to all the conferences and
you stand up on the stage and people are like, oh my god, that person. Yeah.
And there's all the grunt work before that, like
and you probably never reach that level.
Yeah,
like most companies fail.
Yeah, most companies fail, and you just have the sheer grunt work to get a company going.
Yeah. I find it fascinating when I'm talking to large companies, right? Like I remember talking to Symantec and talking to VMware, and I'm talking to some mid-level manager or something like that. And he's like, I had a startup, and I'm like, what? And he's like, no, I sold this startup to said company for a certain amount of money, and I was like, there's just all these companies that you've never heard of where they get acquired for a good amount of like life-changing money, and then the person goes and sort of retires quietly to be a middle manager at that startup and has a family or whatever it is that fulfills them afterwards. But there's just you never hear of most acquired, exited startups because their founders do not get to stand on stage and do the exciting things and keynote things and all that jazz. They built a thing and then it kind of quietly went away.
Maybe they don't want to go stand on the conference stage.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's interesting. And then there's people like, Sean Burns, who came for a prior podcast. Mm-hmm. He founded a pretty successful startup, Flurry.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of that.
I don't know if you're sarcastic or not.
Yeah, no, I've heard of it.
And then he could have just stayed at Yahoo and been a middle manager.
Right.
But no, he started another company from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that kind of serial entrepreneur, it's like, there's a thing that people have that just want to keep building things.
I wanted to keep building things. Yeah, I thought it. So I'm a mentor for my accelerator, which is not YC, it's Alchemist. And I give a class on angel fundraising. Mm-hmm. And the phrase I hate most is just tell us the hack.
The hack?
The hack.
I've never even heard this.
The hack to get angel money.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So everybody has this idea that they write an email, send it to 30 people on AngelList, and then just cash the convertible note.
Oh, my God.
And they're like, what's the hack? I'm like, there is no hack. Well, here, I'll condense my talk.
Yeah.
You write down a list of everybody you know that has money.
Yeah.
You correlate that list with AngelList to see if they actually angel invest.
Yeah.
You set up meetings with them.
Yeah.
You ask them for money.
That actually wouldn't be how I'd describe it.
Well, this is angel fundraising.
Yeah, no. So suppose that you make that list of people you know who have money, and then you discover that there's like 2 people on the list. Then how do you do it?
Well, what I say is usually you have more people than you think.
So the way
So I do this with people like I don't know anybody. I'm like, okay, I know you worked at PayPal.
Right. Well, yeah, okay. If you work for PayPal.
People are always then people come for one-on-one sessions and they're like, oh, I don't know anybody who has money. I'm like, okay, you worked at Yelp.
Right.
Yelp is public.
Like, yeah. So I mean, I came to Silicon Valley with knowing nobody, right? And I started my company very shortly afterwards. And so the list of people who had liquid money was very, very low.
All right, that's the people who I feel sorry for because
there's a hack for that as well. It's that you talk to a bunch of entrepreneurs. You talk to like all the entrepreneurs that you know, and then you tell them that you're raising money, and then you ask them for introductions to the people that you know.
Well, that's what I mean. So
they know.
So you make a list of everybody you know that has money.
Oh, so you're viewing those people who don't have money but like have a connection to money as money. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And so the hack of I just want to send out emails that have money come in. I'm like, no.
I didn't even want to send out emails.
The other thing I didn't like was why does a CEO have to do this?
Oh, because so they want to hire
why can't I hire somebody to go fundraise? I'm like, because
I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Like there's a very intuitive logic that's like, well, it's a simple, repeatable process that other people are good at. You know, why can't they do it?
Well, because then that person is your CEO.
Right. Yeah. There's a tiny thing missing that is like the fundraiser is the CEO.
Well, more than that,
until Series C probably.
What people are really investing in is the core team.
Right. And they want someone who can stand up and stand in front of a PowerPoint slide and present something.
Well,
it's actually a core part of being CEO.
Again, I don't know if you're sarcastic or not.
I'm sort of semi-sarcastic at this point.
I didn't use slides when I fundraised, at least at the angel level.
Yeah, no, I mostly had a conversation.
You have a conversation and you say...
and then you send them the slides afterwards. And then,
I never sent slides.
Oh, really? So that's what I should have done. But inevitably, there'd be someone who says, oh, can you send me the slides? I just want to show it to my partners. And then I would. And then, it's halfway across the valley.
Are these angel or seed?
So at the time that I was fundraising, there was a move for VCs to invest in seed rounds because they didn't really understand how the whole dynamic was playing out. They stopped doing that a couple of years later because it turned out to be a disaster. But I certainly talked to a ton of VCs around it. Yeah,
I think that's a very different thing, though. I think angels and seed are different.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was a disaster?
Why was it a disaster for? So it was signaling risk.
Yeah.
People ended up with 3 investors, 3 VCs in their rounds. None of them would do the A, and as a result, nobody would do the A.
Yeah, and for the firms, they saw it as a funnel where we're going to invest in 10 and then maybe do the round of 2,
if even.
But then that basically shot those other 10.
Yeah. I remember talking to Bessemer in the seed round, and they offered to put in maybe $100K. And I had just, had a big schooling on signaling risk. And they're like, oh, no, we put it in under another name. So the name on the cap table is not actually Bessemer.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And then when it came to do the A, Bessemer didn't give us a term sheet.
Oh, so you took it? So
I didn't take it because I was afraid of the signaling risk and had enough money anyway. And then when it came time to do the A, if I'd had them in the round, it might have been this awful signal that killed the A.
Yeah, well, because then everybody's like, well, what do they know?
Right. And turns out, in the end, they knew nothing. And they just, there's various reasons they didn't do the A.
Yeah, I've heard about this whole thing of scouts.
Like venture partners?
Well, it's a real thing where people will claim they're an angel, but they're actually investing for a VC firm.
Oh, wow. Right, because then they get the information, they pass it to the VC firm, and the entrepreneur doesn't know.
Yeah.
Is that right? That is shitty.
Yeah, we gotta call time.
So, okay, finishing thoughts on this. Interviewing is hard.
Interviewing selects for sometimes the skills that are not the same as success.
And
I'd say
no one
even-
knows how to interview for the skills that are a success and maybe even knows what those skills are.
And I'd say also that it can even select for stuff that is an anti-pattern for success.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.